Minoi tātou. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki wamu. Tuia ki te here tangata, kārongo te pō, kārongo te ao, haumi e, hui e. Yeah, sow us above, sow us below, sow us on the inside, sow us on the outside, sow us together as one people. Bring your peace throughout the day and your peace throughout the night. Haumi e, hui e. Hey, kia ora everybody. My name is Sam Hinari. I te tāu tōku mama he uri au no Ingarangi. I te tāu tōku pāpā he uri au no te taitoki rau. On the side of my mum, I am English, was born in the UK. On the side of my dad, I descend from Te Taitoki Rau, which is northern, going through lots of flooding and things like that. I brought with me some lollies to keep me going. Amen. The beginning. Who can tell me where this font is from? What movie is this font from? Star Wars. There's someone over here. Michael, oh, I'm going to take people out, I know. Oh, wow. I apologise for that. Okay, in the beginning. What do we have in the beginning? Genesis 1, what do we have? Creation, eh? Can't play. So, day one. What does God do on day one?
Light.
Light. Oh, I apologise. There's going to be lots of apologies from me for this first part, at least anyway. Right, so God creates the day and the night, and he does one other thing. What else happens in... He separates the day and the night, yeah. And there's one other thing. It says, there is morning and there is evening. Day two, what happens? Yes, the sea in the sky, yeah. I give it to you. Oh, that was a throw, wasn't it? And what else happens? What else is there on day two? There's morning and there's evening. Oh, look at that. Wow. What was on day three? What's that? Earth, plants and trees. What, you're cool. There's one other thing on day three as well. Oh, come on. Day four, what happens on day four? I'm going to ask for... What's that? Morning and evening. Oh, day. Yep. What else happens? Sun, moon and stars? Right, you guys are just... No more answers from you two. Sun, moon and stars, that's right. Day five? Animals. What animals? I hope so. Give you the cheekiness one. What type of animals? Fish and chips. Fish and birds. And there was one thing else on day five. Oh, kapai. Then what do we have on day six? What does God create? Man. Yes, someone said man. Oh, okay. And what else does he create on day six?
Animals.
What's that?
Other animals.
Yes, other animals. 2. High five. And something else happens on day 6. What else is there? Morning and evening. Who said that? I can jam it. Cool. Then what happens after that? Day 7. Rest. God, rest, yeah. I'm not going to give any more of these. Save them for myself. And so what's Adam's first job? You know Adam's first job? To name the animals? Oh, sorry, no. Yeah, that is Adam's first job, but he does such a terrible job of it. I'm not going to say which animal Susan was. But then God creates Eve as well to be a helper for Adam. But then what happens after that? Then the serpent comes, right? The serpent comes and tempts Adam and Eve. See, before this, Adam and Eve had been in this amazing relationship with God. Genesis talks about how they walked through the garden. This amazing, perfect relationship that they were supposed to have with God. But then the serpent comes and he says to Eve, Eve, why don't you come and take from this tree? I mean, to be fair, it's a very tempting name of the tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It could be named something very less tempting than that. But it's named the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent tempts Eve to take from it, and Eve does. And then Eve says to Adam, you know, you take from this tree as well, you eat this fruit as well. And so Adam eats from it as well. And then they hear, I don't know whether it's straight away or not, but then they hear God walking through the garden at that point, and they know that they've done wrong. And so what do? They hide, right? They hide. And then God's basically, he says, Adam, Eve, where are you guys? You know, he's used to spending time with them. Where are you guys hiding? And they say, we're hiding from you because we're naked. Now that's pretty much the equivalent of when you ask your kid if they ate all the chocolate and they say no, but there's chocolate all around their mouth. Straight away, God knows that something's wrong, right? Because they've said that they're naked. And before that, they were fine to be naked, but they suddenly feel a lot of shame in that. Now, it's very easy for us to sit and to judge Adam and Eve, isn't it? We can stand from afar. Once we know the story, we can stand and say, well, how silly were they? They were given one thing not to do, which was to eat from this tree. They were enjoying this garden, enjoying everything they had, that one thing, and they chose to eat from it. How silly are they? But then I'm sure we can look at our own lives and see very similar sillinesses, or similar kind of traits that we've done in our own lives, right? So I have 3 kids. My oldest son, Izzy, is 4. 5 soon. He's going to be going to school soon, which is very scary for us. But now, before I go on, my dad, who pastors here, he's pastored ever since I've known. And through my whole life, he has shared with the church stories of me doing silly things. Now, instead of getting him back and telling silly stories of him, I thought it was only appropriate that I pass these stories down and tell you guys silly stories about my children as well. And we keep this going. So we know that we've done things wrong. The Bible tells us that we've done things wrong. Isaac, he's got this habit at the moment in the back of the car where he keeps shouting all the time. Not even just in the car, he just keeps shouting in general. He was shouting, Isaac, stop. I go, oh, okay. Isaac, can you stop that? And we'll go through it, and I'll be like, right, serious, Isaac, like, you've got to stop. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm like, Isaac! And this goes on and on and on. He also has done this thing, like, when it comes to eating his dinner, wherever it's something new, he doesn't want to try it. And I know he'll like it, and so Isaac, it's time to eat your dinner. No. Okay, now Isaac, it's time to eat it. No. And what we've been doing at the moment is we take our kids to time out. And so all right, time for time out. No, we go to time out. Leave them in. I sit with him, and then I say, look, Isaac, you know, that wasn't the greatest way to behave, was it? You know, it's time for dinner. You going to eat your dinner? Okay, I'm sorry, Dad. Yeah, come back to the table. Okay, here you go, Isaac. No. Isaac. And we go through this, and we can see, and these are kind of funny stories that I'm sharing, but I'm sure we can see in our lives when we have done not so good things and silly things ourselves, which anybody else could look into our lives and go, well, that was a silly thing, wasn't it? So in the same way when we judge Eve, I'm sure we've all got our own things that we have done wrong. And even though it is a joke, sin is a really serious thing, because what it has done is it has separated us from this beautiful, perfect relationship that we were created to have with God. That's what it's done. So, as I said before, with Adam and Eve in this amazing, perfect relationship, and because of our sin, that has been completely separate. So we are no longer in this amazing, perfect relationship. But then God did something really amazing. And what God did was he sent his son, he sent Jesus Christ to come onto the earth. Now, when Jesus came, he showed humility. His whole life was him showing humility in the things that he was doing. And I want to go through 3 ways in which he showed this humility. The first way that he showed his humility was that he came as a child. Now, what does this mean to be a child? Well, first of all, we know that Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he decided to come down and be a little baby. That's humility in that as it is. That is humility. But what does it mean to be a child? Well, it means not knowing, doesn't it? Starting from a baby, you don't know anything apart from when you're hungry. And you have to be taught everything. Now, as I said with my own children, I've had this experience with them recently. My youngest, Charlie, over here, is asleep in the pram, and we've had to teach them how to eat. This is not just, we haven't taught Charlie this yet, but we're teaching him to eat. We've taught our other kids how to walk, how to run, and how to talk. So to be, come back to being humble as a child means you have to learn absolutely everything all over again. Now, again, this is Jesus who, it talks about him in Genesis 1, that he was the Word and the Word was there at the beginning. So he is now having to go back to be a child and be taught by his own creations. It's really interesting. Now, for me, over the last probably 5 years, I've started trying to learn 2 languages. Me and my wife, we lived in Cambodia for a while, so the first language we started to learn was Khmer, and since coming back, we've been learning Te Reo Māori. Now, when you are someone who lives in a country and you can't speak the language of that country, you feel really silly. Well, I did when I was in Cambodia. I felt really stupid. And it's something, just kind of a little side note for us, when we meet people who don't speak English in our country, we don't have to treat them like they don't know anything as well, because they do know lots of things, but a little side note for us. Because that's how it was for us in Cambodia. We were treated like that, like we didn't know anything. Now, in Cambodia, the main method of getting around is tuk-tuk. And these tuk-tuks would line up all down the street, and as soon as you step out of the house, it'll be going tuk-tuk, tuk-tuk, and you go and get in the tuk-tuk. And so what we'd be doing is we'd be saying no, so we'd be learning Khmer, and no was ate, ate, so we'd go say, oh, tuk-tuk, ate ako, no thank you, ate ako, and they'd just mock us like nobody's business. They'd be like, oh, ate, because obviously we're pronouncing it wrong. And we were just getting torn apart for it. It was so humiliating walking down the street. I was like, come on, I'm trying, guys. Like, don't do this to me. And then in the church was a Khmer-speaking church. There was a few Westerners there, but a majority, because that's what we love as New Frontiers, isn't it? We want the church to look like the culture where it is. We don't want it to all just be a Western representation of what church is. We want a church in Cambodia to be Cambodian, so we're not expecting them to speak English. So but anyway, we're learning, and so we're learning a few words. We come up and meet new people, and I'm trying to be super friendly to the new people who would come. So I'd say, oh, Jomni Absua, Stay, so hello, and then Soksabai, which means how are you? And they'd say Soksabai back. And then we'd just kind of stand there. That was the limit of what I knew. And then sometimes they'd say, they'd keep talking to me. I'm like, do I act like I know? Like, and at the end, I'd just be like, sorry, I don't know what you're saying. And then they wouldn't even understand that I was just trying to say that. And then we'd just be like, oh, and then there's one word that kind of goes across all cultures, which is like coffee or cafe. And so, coffee, okay. And then we go and have coffee after that. It was kind of our escape. But the thing was, basically when you're learning a new language, you're going back to being like a child again. You go back to not knowing. It's so hard to do anything. When we were there, in our first few weeks, our tuk-tuk driver, a guy called Bruttoit, which translated to small boy, he used to take us in, and I was too scared to talk to him to ask where to go. So we were kind of homebound for 2 weeks because I was so scared of trying to talk to him and getting sent back. And then only to realise that he did speak English all the while. But again, for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords to come down and know nothing and be taught by his creation is an amazing example of humility. We have the story of when Jesus goes and starts teaching at the temple when he's a young boy, right? When he's about 11 or 12, I think it says. Now, this is without his parents knowing. His parents have kind of gone off and like, oh no, we left Jesus behind, going back and get Jesus. And they then take Jesus with them, and it says, then he went down to Nazareth with them, and he was obedient to them, which implies that he continued to learn under his parents, right? So Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, humbled himself to be taught by his creation. Point number 2, he humbled himself to listen, although he already knew what was going to happen. Now we see this in a few examples. We see this with when Jesus goes to Lazarus. After Lazarus has died, word is sent to Jesus, and they say, Jesus, you've got to come and pray for Lazarus and heal Lazarus. So Jesus, he takes his time at this point, but he eventually arrives and gets to the tomb where Lazarus is. Now at this point, Martha runs out. He's the older sibling of the 2 sisters. So you've got Mary and Martha, they're Lazarus' sisters. So Martha runs out and she says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Now, Jesus turns up to the situation knowing that he can raise Lazarus from the dead. But does he interrupt Martha and say, Martha, no, don't worry. It's all good, don't worry. He doesn't. He lets Martha speak, doesn't he? He needs to hear what Martha has to say. And then the younger sister, Mary, so Martha goes back and gets Mary, and Mary's mourning in the house, and so Mary then runs out. It says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Again, Jesus chooses to listen. Like, as I said before, why did he choose to listen? He obviously sees value in what these people had to say, even though he knew he could have raised Lazarus from the dead. Now, I always find it quite funny, but also a little bit embarrassing when we put ourselves in Jesus' shoes. Because I imagine if it was me, I'd have said, as I see Martha running towards me, crying, I said, Martha, don't worry. I'm going there now. Don't worry, we're going. And then, Mary, we're going to... But that's not what he does. He sits and he listens to what Mary and Martha have to say. We then see him do this again when he heals the blind man, when he heals Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus, a man who is blind, means he's sitting on the side of the road, and he starts calling out as Jesus walks by. He starts calling out, Jesus, Jesus. And all the people go, Bartimaeus, shush, please be quiet, please be quiet. And you go, no, Jesus, Jesus. He's calling out for Jesus. Now, Jesus could see that he is blind, I imagine. This would have been a very obvious thing. But what does Jesus say? He says, what do you want me to do for you? It's always laughable at this point that Jesus says that. Like, Jesus has built his ministry on healing the sick. And then he turns to a blind man and says, what do you want me to do to you? What do you want me to do for you? You imagine Bartimaeus being like, I don't want to spell it out for you, Jesus, but like, I'd like to. And what did he say? Rabbi, I want to see. So that is the point there, that Jesus humbled himself, that even when he knew what the outcome was going to be, he chose to listen to who was in front of him and chose to listen to what they wanted to say, which is really important. Lastly, Jesus humbled himself to death. The famous verse from Philippians 2, verse 6 to 8. Can we all read this together, please? Let's all read this. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even to death on a cross. Now, this is the ultimate form of humility when Jesus did this. Now, this is more than just the one moment, but this is a long time coming. See, Jesus foretells his death a long time before he dies. He begins to talk about it. He knows it's coming. He then goes and sits with his best mates, his 12 disciples who've been following around everywhere, having a dinner with them, and he again talks about his death. But not only that, is he knows that there's the person in the room who's going to lead to his arrest. Judas is in the room. He knows that, and he says that. But then he continues to say, this is my body, which is broken for you. This is my blood, which is poured out for you. Jesus knows this is coming. Jesus then goes from there and goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, where he says to these same group of mates, apart from Judas, who's run off at this point, he says to his group of mates, look, can you stay and pray with me? Like, you know, I've been talking about this moment coming for a while now. All I'm asking is for you to stay and pray with me. But his best mates, they fall asleep. And this isn't one of those moments where we say, this is the triumphant Son of God who no worries stood there, happy as to go through this. But no, it talks about how his sweat was like blood, right? He was terrified of going through with this. He was terrified of going through with this. And then he goes back to his mates, says there, guys, like, can you pray? Like, I mean, if this was you, and if I go to my mates and I ask them to pray for something with me, I don't expect them to fall asleep. Like, I expect them to pray with me. And then, so he wakes them up and he goes back to God, and he's terrified. He says, God, take this cup from me. I don't want to go through with this. But he says, but God, if it is your will, let it be done. He says, God, I'm going to lay myself down. I'm going to sacrifice myself because it is your will. And then he goes back to his mates and they've fallen asleep again. He wakes them up. He's arrested at that point. Judas, by one of his best mates, Judas comes, betrays him. He's taken away. And he goes through with one of the most humiliating deaths that you see. He's continuously mocked as he goes through this. They put a purple robe over him and say, oh, now look who's the king of the Jews. Now they put the crown of thorns, whack on, oh, okay, you call yourself a king? Come on, then you call yourself a king. But what does Jesus do in return? What does he say back? Nothing. The whole time he sits there and says nothing back to them. He goes through with it. The ultimate act of humility. The only kind of thing he really says was when they turned to him and say, oh, you call yourself the king? You call yourself the king of the Jews? He just goes, well, that's what you say I am. And that's pretty much all he says throughout the whole of this moment. They're going through this horrible excruciating death. They then take all his clothes from him, hang him up on the cross to die with criminals. Remember, this is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, who never did anything wrong, being hung up with criminals. Going through the same death that was there for the criminals as well. And he went through this. And then at the end of it, just to top it off, he says, what does he say at the end there when he's standing on the cross? He says, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they've done. Like, this is the ultimate act of humility. Again, Philippians, he went through to death, but not only death, but even to death on a cross. Even to the death that he went through. And then at that moment, Jesus Christ died on that cross, and as he died, he took all the sins of those who believed in him, and all of the sins of those who are going to believe with him, and he took those sins with him to death when he died. So that now, so he took those, and when he died, those sins were gone, and he rose 3 days later, conquering death for all time. So that now, when God looks at us, if you're a Christian, when God looks at us, God looks at you, God does no longer see you as a sinful person. He does no longer see you for the things you have done wrong, but he sees you as perfection. He chooses to see you as Jesus Christ and see you as perfection. So that now, from the sin that was happened at the beginning with Adam and Eve and the sins that we continue to make, that God has kind of said, enough of that, I'm going to bring you back into this relationship with me. And we are then restored, but not only that, we've had a little bit being talked about this morning, that not only that, but we are then told we are sons and daughters of Christ. We're not just going, oh yeah, you guys are good enough now. No, we are sons and daughters of Christ now. Now, often we can take these things and it's awesome to know, and we go, oh, well, that's nice for me. Excellent, son and daughter of Christ. But no, it was better than that. It wasn't just for you. It wasn't just for me. But this was done for the world. And in Revelation 7, we see that verse which talks about the church of Christ. In Revelation, where it talks about every tribe and every tongue worshipping around the throne. It talks about this beautiful, multicultural bride of Christ. Remember, every language, not just one language, every tongue, every nation around the bride, around the throne. And we can look through other verses that talk about this bride, such as in Corinthians. It says, just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honourable, we treat with special honour. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body. But that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. This is the beautiful bride of Christ that we are called to be a part of. Not all looking the same, not all being the same, not all acting the same, but we are all different, but we're all part of this one body of Christ. And there is one head to this body. In Colossians it says, and he, Jesus, is the head of the body, the church. Jesus is the head. Not one of these other parts of the body, not one of these other cultures, not one of these other races or nationalities, but Jesus is the head. When I go back, down the bottom here it says, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honoured, every part rejoices with it. Now, recently what we have seen on the news that has been coming up is we have seen that there has been one particular part of the body that has been suffering. When George Floyd was murdered on the streets, it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. It was something that had been happening for many years, but it was the first time it became such a big public thing and the world began to take notice. And in New Zealand, we love to play the underdog in New Zealand a lot of the time, don't we? Oh, poor little New Zealand. Oh, we're not as bad as Australia. We're not as bad as America. But if we think that we are isolated in this own little Garden of Eden, then I think we're sadly mistaken if we think that these things aren't happening in our land as well. And I've got a few examples of how it's affected people that we know, and I'll bring that out a bit later, but it's important for us to know that this has been something that has impacted people in our church in a very significant way. And so often we can sit there and we say, well, how do we respond to this? How do we respond to this? We see people protesting on the street. We see the murder, a man murdered on the street, executed on the street for the colour of his skin, and we can say, well, how do we react to this? Well, the first way we react is we show humility. We humble ourselves. We humble ourselves. Now, Jesus Christ, he humbled himself as a child. Now, we must humble ourselves to be like children as well. And what does it mean to humble ourselves to be children? It means to know nothing. It means to know nothing. I think for many of my white brothers and sisters, we don't understand what coloured people go through on a daily basis. And for much of the world, this was eye-opening for a majority of the world to suddenly see that this was happening, for a majority of the Western world, the white world. But we must ask questions of our coloured brothers and sisters. We must humble ourselves and ask questions and sit down beside our coloured brothers and sisters to see how they're doing. Jesus humbled himself to listen. Instead of speaking, Jesus listened. Instead of coming through with what he thought, instead of Jesus, and Jesus knew the answers, he knew the answers, and even though he knew the answers to the solutions, he listened. So for us, and I'd argue that a lot of us don't know the answers to the solutions, how much more important is it for us then to listen to our coloured brothers and sisters? Now what happened was, after the murder of George Floyd, we saw many people react on social media. It obviously just blew up everywhere. And I saw a lot of reactions from the church, and not from our church, but from lots of different churches. And to be honest, I was really upset with the majority of what I saw on Facebook as a response from many churches, because the way many churches responded, it was as if they were seeing racism for the first time and felt that they had to speak into it. And so we got some really silly comments that were being made. I'm not going to say what the comments are. I'm sure you probably already know what they were. But some really silly things were said. But what we realize is that we have to first listen. If Jesus saw the value in listening, how much more must we see the value in listening? Instead of trying to come up with solutions and answers. Because for often what can happen is when something like this comes up, many people can get on the defensive and they say, it wasn't me who did it. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. How can I be sorry for the things my ancestors have done? It wasn't me. I'm right. I'm okay. I'm not racist. It's okay. But when we look at Jesus, when Jesus came to the earth, did he come to prove himself right? Did he come and say, well, I've never done anything wrong, it's not me, this is all you guys who've done? No, that wasn't Jesus' reaction. But Jesus came to reconcile and to restore. That was why Jesus came, to reconcile those who were lost and restore them, as we've seen, to being sons and daughters of God, was the reason he came. Now, when these things come up, surely our reaction shouldn't be to try and prove ourselves right, but we should be reacting to try and reconcile what has happened and to restore our coloured brothers and sisters and lift them up. James 1 verse 19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now, as we all know, we have an amazing whānau in our church being Delianesta Olewole. Tēnā kōrua. An amazing whānau in our church. And I asked them the question, I said to how did the George Floyd incident impact your whānau? Now, this is an important kōrero for us to listen to, because for many of us, again, we can sit there and think, well, this doesn't impact New Zealand or people in New Zealand. But let's listen to it and realise that this does impact our brothers and sisters. Remember, our brothers and sisters in Christ. We are part of the body. We're all part of this one body. These are our brothers and sisters. So I said, how did the George Floyd incident impact your whānau? This is the response I got. Considering the racial tension in the US, George Floyd's murder didn't come to us as a surprise. This is because he was not the first African American that would be killed in such a manner. What his death did do to us was it had reminded us once again that though we have chosen to call New Zealand home, we are among a people who do not look like us. A sense of insecurity we've been trying to wade off since the Christchurch mosque shooting. Our family had been away from Africa for nearly 20 years. Before the Christchurch shooting, we felt we had finally arrived home after a long sojourn. After the Christchurch shooting, we started to question what could have happened if anyone in our family was walking on Deans Avenue on the 15th of March 2019 when the shooter targeted everyone who didn't look like him. This is Deli speaking. He says, "The incident became even more real to me when I contemplated buying a bicycle during the lockdown for exercise. I tried very hard to convince myself that surely I should be okay cycling any time of the day in Wellington, even if I cannot convince myself of the same in Christchurch. As I managed to convince myself that the Christchurch shooting is a one-off, the George Floyd killing happened. George's killing in broad daylight by those who swore to protect him took away all the hard work I'd put into convincing myself. Increasingly Blossom, who's Delianesta's beautiful daughter, increasingly Blossom, who we have carefully protected before now from the unfortunate behaviour of some people from a particular race towards Africans and people of the black race, was now asking questions. Some of which we can answer, and some we just have no answers to, as we don't understand why, despite the documented achievements of people of colour all over the world, the white race still looks down on them as inferior. That is what George Floyd's killing had done to us. Having lived in Denmark, UK, and now New Zealand, it strongly feels like we are navigating in a world filled with systematic forces designed against us. We console ourselves knowing that our God is still on the throne, that the Lord is our shepherd, and that all will be well. Now, as I read that out, there are probably some people reacting in different ways in their head. But let me just remind you, first and foremost, that we act out of humility and we listen, because we don't know. Lots of us don't know. So first and foremost, we listen. If Jesus listened, then we must also listen as well. Because these are our brothers and sisters. If one part of the body suffers, then the whole body suffers. Lastly, we must humble ourselves to death, as Jesus did. He humbled himself to death, even death on the cross. Can I get the band to come up, please? We are the body and must love our brothers and sisters before ourselves. If we see our whānau hurt, like this sounds basic, doesn't it? If we see our whānau hurting, we must get alongside them. We must get alongside them. The Bible says there is no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Now, this might be that you have seen some of the things that are going on, and you can look at the protests and the statues that are toppling down, and you might have strong feelings about this. But we die to these feelings for the sake of our brothers and sisters. We die to these things for them. First and foremost, we love our brothers and sisters. Because the thing is, with issues such as the protests and the statues going down, we can sit and have a kōrero about that for years, for a long time. And what it's doing is it's taking away from what has actually happened. It's taking away from the point. And so we must, first and foremost, get alongside our brothers. I mean, I feel like for many of you, this is ringing true, and I know that, but we must get alongside our brothers and sisters. Remember that first and foremost in any situation, let us love our whānau first. This is the beautiful bride of Christ that he poured his life out for. Let us do the same and pour our lives out for this beautiful bride as well. And we'll get things wrong on this journey. We will get things wrong, and it's okay. But let love be most important in what we do. 1 Peter 4 verse 8, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Now, when we're trying to do this, we will probably get things wrong. We will say silly things. We're people. Of course we will. But if our heart is full of love for my brothers and sisters, that is what comes first. There is grace in that. Now, I can have all kinds of conversations with people about different things, and people have said things to me which normally would have been hurtful to me, but I knew I was talking with my brother, and I knew that they were not trying to say things to hurt me. And from that position, we can work through things. Because we are all on the same team. We are all one whānau. We are all in this together. Therefore, we must be willing to lay our lives down for our brothers and sisters. John 15 says, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. How has he loved us? He gave up, came down to the earth as a baby, went through that, listened, was taught by us, and died on the cross for us. That is how he has loved us. So my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. 1 Corinthians 13 talks about love. Let's all say this together. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. That always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. We're going to read through that one more time again, whānau. But this time, I want us to think about the way we have been reacting to the death of George Floyd when we go through this. There'll be things that God will highlight in your heart as we read through this again. Let's read through this one bit again. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, therefore it is humble. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So now faith, hope, and love abide here, these three things. But the greatest of these is love. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.